Hello, my name is Alan Ejana. Today I'll be presenting on negligence caused contamination in Goiania, Brazil. The purpose and objective of this presentation is to show and understand how Brazil's governmental negligence led to catastrophic chemical exposures, and as well to show how chemical exposures could lead to widespread immediate health outcomes and the need for stricter regulations when it comes to institutions or even just companies working with radioactive chemicals. I asked the question of if radiation levels are is if there's a relationship between radiation levels and chronic disease in Goiania, Brazil. Here's my table of content. As we can see, I begin with the story of Dos Niños and as well go on to show the consequences of radioactivity and as well as the health effects due to the environmental disasters I'm about to discuss. The story of Cidade dos Niños. Cidade dos Niños is a orphanage specifically, but it was also the scene of one of Brazil's worst environmental disasters. But unlike other cases like the one I'm about to discuss next, this 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 contamination didn't has kind of been getting forgotten since it happened so long ago, and there's a lack of recognition by the Brazilian government. However, in around the 1947, around in the 1940s or so, there was a high prevalence of malaria at the time, and in 1947, the Ministry of Education and Health made use of 8 disused buildings to set up the Institute of Mariology. But in the same year, that's when the orphanage Cidade dos Niños was founded. As time went on, Brazil was looking to transform more into an industrial powerhouse. Therefore, they began producing insecticides. Production came to a stop though in 1960 due to a request from the Christ the Redeemer Shelter Foundation. However, in closing up this institution, at least 260 metric tons of HCH powder, otherwise known as hexachlor hexachlor hexachlorocyclohexane. Hopefully, I pronounced that right, but it's abbreviated as HCH. HCH powder was spread across Cidade in a little over 20 years, and after 60 years or so, high levels of HCH were found in the blood of 95% of 1,400 tested inhabitants. Meaning, once the HCH was left behind, adult and employees of the children's shelter also were making use of the materials that were left behind in this factory, whether it be building huts or chicken coops. They were just using this contaminating chemical, and this was because since there wasn't anyone there keeping an eye on things, whatever was left behind at the factory became communal property in a sense. Health effects of HCH. HCH can cause different harms to one's body, such as rapid weight loss. Individuals exposed to HCH have reported symptoms such as headache, irritability, restlessness, and fatigue. One can also develop gallstones, insomnia, and nocratia, which means waking up in the middle of the night or not being able to sleep through the whole night. Now I'm going to discuss the Goianian accident. This was a radioactive contamination. A private radiotherapy institute in Goiania, Brazil, was just about zero point 0.6 miles from a location called Praca. The institute had decided to relocate to Praca and left behind cesium. The cesium had been purchased in 1977, and in this slide we can see a timeline of the events that took place shortly after, leading to widespread contamination. So on September 13th, the guard who was responsible for watching the site had decided to take the day off. So in come Roberto and Roberto and Wagner Perrier, who illegally entered the demolished radiotherapy institute, thinking there was some value to the materials left behind. They disassembled the teletherapy unit, taking home with them the source assembly. On September 15th, Pierre had to visit a local clinic where his symptoms were diagnosed as a result of something he had eaten, and he was told to go back home and rest. But little did he know this was due to the radioactive material that he had taken home with him. Meanwhile, Roberto continued with his efforts to dismantle the equipment and eventually freed the cesium capsule from its protective rotating head. On September 16th, Alves succeeded in puncturing the capsule's aperture window, meaning he exposed a specific blue light coming from the tiny opening he had created. Fascinated by this, Alves sold the items to a nearby friend called Devier. He noticed the blue glow from the punctured capsule as well. Thinking the capsule's content were valuable or even supernatural, he immediately took it home with him. Devier was excited, so he decided to invite his friends and family members to take a look at the capsule. This took place on September 21st, but on that same day, his wife, 37-year-old Gabriela Maria, began to fall ill. By September 25th, Devier had sold the scrap metal to a third party scrapyard. On September 28th, 1987, 15 days after the capsule had been found, the Veer sister notified the authorities as she was the first to notice that many people around her were falling ill at the same time ever since in this and it was in the same time period, of being exposed to the capsule and the cesium. On September 29th, the source of the contamination was found as a visiting medical physicist used the Scytalian counter to confirm the presence of radioactivity and persuaded the authorities to act immediately in order to mitigate the situation. Here we can see the health outcomes. So this bar graph shows the health consequences suffered due to being exposed to cesium. Approximately 250 people were exposed to 137 Cs of cesium from the abandoned radiotherapy unit. At least 14 patients showed some degree of bone marrow depression, and 18 developed classical signs of symptoms of acute radiation syndrome. 28 people presented local radiation injuries ranging from first to third degree, and 140 individuals showed evidence of internal contamination. We can see the severity of the health outcomes due to the exposure. And then this is the aftermath. So more tests were done to see if there are any other effects due to the radiation. So about 112,000 people were examined for radioactive contamination. This happened a while after the exposure, or at least after the contamination had been identified. 249 people were found to have significant levels of radioactive material in or on their bodies. 129 people had internal contamination, but this internal contamination wasn't so it was in small doses. And 1,000 people were identified as having suffered a dose which was greater than 1 year of background radiation. So we can still see that there were some effects here of the radiation from the cesium. And are there any long-term health effects? So radiation is associated with chronic diseases such as cancer specifically. So I was interested to see if there's any incidences of breast cancer in the location where the Radiotherapy Institute of Goiania had left their cesium. Therefore, On the x-axis, we can see the annual average effective dose, meaning the levels of cesium within within a specific area, and then on the y-axis, we can see the crude incidence rate of breast cancer. From from the graph, we can immediately tell that there is no specific association with high levels of cesium and breast cancer. So, in this specific scenario, there might be confounders that I'm not addressing or not considering, but there isn't, even further research hasn't found much association or a huge relationship between the case in Brazil of cesium contamination and chronic diseases such as cancer per se. So, in summary, we can see how Brazil's history of negligence, not just on the governmental part, but even institutions and corporations, has led to contamination of the public having to deal with the contamination of from chemicals and having to suffer health outcomes, severe health outcomes because of it. We've seen the health effects of HCHC, specifically even in just interestingly, HCHC is still used today. Some people use it in their diets because it's a as noted before, it does help with weight loss, but it does have a lot of adverse health effects. We've seen how cesium exposure came to be in Brazil, along with the the health effects of cesium exposure. And finally, the health outcomes associated with radiation levels. There hasn't been much data to show a significant relationship between the cesium case in Brazil and cases of cancer or any other chronic diseases at the moment. And these are my references. Thank you.